Welcome to the Paramedic Preload. My name is Nathan.
I'm the other guy, known as Josh.
And today we are going to dive into some pharmacology.
Decoding pharmacology.
We want to start kind of a little mini-series on the pharmacology side. We want to break into some pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics and why pharmacology is so important for us.
Yeah, so pharmacology is one of those things I don't think a lot of paramedics out in the field truly have a good grasp on or fully understand or respect. And a lot of it comes from paramedics just trying to memorize drug dosages or something like that, or like a drug regimen, just like rote memorization. And truly, there are a lot of concepts in pharmacology that we really need to grasp and understand to understand what is truly going on with our patients when we start administering medications with them, or just understanding their past medical history, etc., and their overall clinical picture when we're running these patients in the field.
I felt like one of the most dangerous things we can do out there in the field is just give medications, but we don't know what to expect that it's going to do to the body.
Yeah.
We don't know, what to expect. Like, we can't explain it to the patient how it's going to work or why it's going to work. And it just becomes very dangerous because if we don't know the adverse side effects, we don't know the indications, we don't know the contraindications, then the odds of us making a huge medical error is going to be much higher.
We start becoming like, old school parents or something like that. What am I getting? You're getting aspirin. Why? Well, because, you're having chest pain. Okay, why? Well, it's an antiplatelet. Well, why? Just it is because it is.
Just
like
chew the aspirin.
Just chew the aspirin. And truly understanding the why behind what we're giving to patients and what it's doing to the patient's body is of paramount importance when we start putting stuff inside of people.
Yeah, to get into the statistics for this and why this is so important to us. In the United States, there are over 10,000 prescription medications out there. And I know that we see a lot of them over and over. We see them daily.
Yeah, we see the common ones.
Yeah, but there are definitely medications out there that I still have to look up occasionally, or I hear and I'm like, man, I haven't heard that name yet. That must be new on the market.
What's the new designer med now?
Yeah. And of course, with a lot of these meds, not only, once they lose their patents and all the other, through the FDA and all of a sudden
becomes something new.
Yeah.
Somebody else brands it. Yeah.
Yeah, you get new brands and new titles out there. And so there's a ton of medications out there. And I feel like daily there's new medications coming out to treat something. And we've all seen the commercials for them. And on top of that, 1 in 3 adults have 5 or more medications concurrently. And so we would call that in the field, we call it polypharmacy.
Yeah. And the older people get, and, life expectancy is only expanding, but that is because of medicine and, our quality of life, etc. But, the older you get put on more medications. So these patients, 1 in 3 is not a small number. Approximately a third of the U.S. population is on 5 or more medications at the same time. And when it comes to what we're talking about, particularly today in this episode, is these medications interact with each other. Like they do things to the body, sometimes potentiating each other's effects or blocking each other's effects. So doses get changed by one doctor, and then the other medication the other doctor prescribed isn't as effective. So now they have to adjust that dose, and it becomes the patient, like you said, becomes this polypharma thing, which could ultimately lead to a 911 call.
Well, the other problem that we have is as sophisticated as we become with all of our systems, most doctors don't talk to each other. So you have your cardiologist and you have your gastroenterologist and you have your ER doctors, and they start prescribing stuff over other things.
Yes.
And so really what we end up with is over 700,000 emergency room visits resulting from adverse events from drugs.
Yeah.
And we don't want to be the reason for one of those adverse events.
Which is not a small number, for one, and it costs the U.S. healthcare system billions of dollars every year in adverse drug events. And these are anything from mild side effects all the way up to seizure, coma, death. Yeah. Right. But approximately half of all adverse drug events are completely preventable if we understand the pharmacology, the pharmacodynamics, and the pharmacokinetics behind what we are doing.
So let's talk about those big words.
Yeah, those are some big words.
Yes.
So you win Scrabble when you get that, right? If you can spell pharmacokinetics,
I think that's
Scrabble.
Yeah, that's a solid, you win the game right off the draw.
Yeah. So the first one we'll talk about to try to break this down. So when we talk about pharmacology is the study of medications, right? There's two core concepts that we really need to grasp on the foundational level when it comes to pharmacology, and that is pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics. These are two very important core concepts that we as field providers must have a solid understanding of in order to be doing the right thing for our patient and not be doing any harm. The first one we'll talk about is going to be pharmacokinetics. And pharmacokinetics is what the body does to a drug. It's what the body does, right? So this covers like the metabolization of a drug, not necessarily the drug's effects. That's going to be something different. Pharmacokinetics is what does the body do to the drug, right?
Yeah, and so the journey that's going to go through is it has to go through more of a macro systemic journey throughout the body.
Yeah.
So on its stage, it's going to go through absorption and how that's going to be given, right? So whether we're giving that PO, whether we're giving that through IV, whether we're giving it IM, however we're going to be given that, the distribution of that throughout the body, and then the metabolism or the way that it's going to get broken down inside the body. How does this venture through the body? What's going to be most effective? What's going to break it down? And then the excretion, because anything that we put into our body somehow has to be processed and of course is going to get excreted in some form.
And anything that checks in and doesn't check out is probably a carcinogen and is causing cancer.
It's not something we want inside our body. So that macro systemic side through our journey, and we go through. And so it's really important that we know, how does the body take this medication in?
Yeah. And like when you think about it, the whole point of pharmacokinetics, the real focus of it is it becomes important because this is how we get our dosing. This is how we get the timing of medications that we give and how we get our routes of administration and why they're important. Why some routes are different than for one medication versus another medication, you know? And it's all part of, like you said, that macro systemic view, that absorption, distribution, metabolism, and excretion. That is how we define like how we're going to give a medication.
Yeah, you hear a lot of people, you say, well, why do you give epi every 3 to 5 minutes? Because my protocol told me to.
Yeah.
How about it's because let's talk about how the body metabolizes it. How does the body break it down?
When I look at Hand Heavy, it says.
And it also goes into understanding how the body metabolizes things in adverse conditions. So when they're acidotic, when they're hypothermic, when they're hyperthermic, when different processes throughout the body are going on, the metabolism is going to be faster. It's going to be slower, which means we're going to have to change the way that we give the medication or how often we give. And so this all plays just such an important role in that when we start looking at the clinical focus.
Absolutely. That's why we have to understand the basic pharmacokinetics of the medications that we give. Now that brings us to our next word that we're going to talk about today. And that's another long word, but that is pharmacodynamics. So, like we were saying, pharmacokinetics, that is what does the body do to the drug. Pharmacodynamics is going to be what does the drug do to the body. This is very much like, why are we giving the drug? This is when you're like a new paramedic and, you know, your preceptor looks at you and goes, why are you giving this? You know, you go, I want to give fentanyl. And your preceptor goes, okay, why? Why do you want to do it? This is understanding the pharmacodynamics behind the medication. Pharmacokinetics, that's how we get the drug into the body, how it's spread about, how it's metabolized and excreted out of the body. Pharmacodynamics has to do with the drug itself and what it does to the body.
And that works at a microcellular level.
Yeah.
And this is where we start really talking about receptors and how do receptor sites work. And they essentially talk about it at a receptor ligand relationship. And all that really is when we look at it, how does that chemical move through the body and lock into the place where it gets the reaction that it's looking for? Yeah. So the one I always like to use, because I feel like it's just one of the easiest for people to relate to, is when we talk about opioids and people taking opioids, and the person takes this medication or this drug and it goes through their body. And as it's going through their body, we have opioid receptor sites inside our body, and the opioid is a key to that. And it essentially fits that just like it would a key to your door, to your front door.
Yep.
I may have a key that looks exactly like that key, but if it's not to your front door, I can't unlock it. I can put it into the keyhole. It just won't turn,
it won't
right?
do anything.
Won't turn the tumbler. So at the same time here with our receptor sites, That is, it goes around and opiates find that opioid receptor site and they lock in, and it is the exact shape of what it needs to be. So it unlocks the effects that they are expecting to get from that drug or that medication. It creates that chemical reaction, which is how you get those effects from the medications.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like how you bring up opiates and the opiate effects, right? So yeah, those opiates go find that opioid receptor, that mu opioid receptor, and they sit there and it unlocks that door. And when I say unlocks that door, I mean it fires off those neurotransmitters that are causing our body effects, right? Now, they might be negative effects. We do give opiates as a medication, but if you overdose or you're using this recreationally, it can cause some negative effects that we commonly see, and that's going to be our unconsciousness or hypoventilation, etc. when we're having to run these patients. And a medication we give to counteract that is going to be our Narcan. And like you're saying with the receptor sites, Narcan finds the exact same receptor sites that opiates use. It sits there, or it puts its key in the keyhole, but it can't turn, it can't open the door. But it's blocking another key from taking up the same receptor site. So it's a receptor site antagonist. It binds to that receptor site, but it doesn't elicit the response. And that's why understanding the pharmacodynamics is super important, because that is what our therapeutic effect is. That is what our side effects could be. That is what potential toxicity would look like, right? That is understanding the pharmacodynamics of the medication that we're giving.
And we talk about the toxicity of it. Obviously, if you don't understand your medication, you don't understand your dosing and your timing, your kinetics of it, then we are going to lead to a toxic state, because we are going to flood their system with this medication that keeps hitting receptor sites and keeps getting used up on those receptor sites, and it's going to cause a toxic environment.
Like, just imagine bolusing in an entire bag of lidocaine into a patient, right? You get lidocaine toxicity. You spike it with a 10 drop and forget to clamp it down, and you just throw it all in there, and they get 2 grams over 3 minutes. That's not good.
That's not.
That's going to be an extremely toxic patient, right?
That's not good for anyone.
Yeah. So back to our pharmacokinetics, right? You mentioned some things. You mentioned absorption, distribution, metabolism, and excretion. Those are important parts of pharmacokinetics itself. So when we come to absorption into the body, there's a couple different ways we get meds into the body, right? Those are going to be our routes of administration. There's 2 divisions of that. There's enteral routes, which are going to be utilizing the GI system itself. And then there's parenteral routes, which are going to be any method that does not utilize the GI system. So PO medications, sublingual medications, etc. Those are medications that we are using the GI system to absorb with. Parenteral routes are going to be like our IV, IM, sub-Q, transdermal, etc. They're routes that bypass the GI system altogether. And that becomes important later on. But we'll get there. We'll get there. I don't think we're there yet. We'll get there, though. And then distribution. So we covered absorption. Distribution now is the transport. It is the movement of the medication throughout the bloodstream to get to the target tissues that we want our medication to have an effect on. That's distribution. Now, there's a couple different words that are used for the next one. One of them is metabolism. Metabolism is closely tied to, and it's interchangeable with biotransformation. So biotransformation or metabolism, potato, right? It is the body changing the chemical nature of the drug that we've put into the body into useful metabolites. And that primarily takes place in the liver. That's the main place it goes to for drugs to be changed into useful chemicals, is going to be done in the liver. And then after our drug gets metabolized and it gets distributed to our target tissues for it to have hopefully the positive effect we want it to have, it has to be excreted out of the body. And it can be excreted a number of different ways. However, the primary way things get excreted is going to be through the renal system, through urine, or into stool. One of those 2. You can also have medications that get, excreted through ventilation or through sweat or through breast milk, etc. But the primary ways are going to be through urine and through stool.
And understanding the excretion method also is going to play a pretty major role in the way we treat our patients as well, because we talk about the kinetics and the dynamics, and let's talk about people who have kidney failure.
Yeah.
And we start giving them medications. Well, if we're giving them these full doses and we're not paying attention to what we're giving them and how it's excreted, we're going to put an excessive strain. I mean, if they're in full kidney failure, they're not going to be releasing it anyways, right? They're going to have to go through dialysis and all this. But if somebody is unable to excrete urine appropriately, it is going to sit in their system, and then it's going to cause that toxicity effect.
Absolutely.
Or if they already have some damage, there are some medications that are known to be harsh enough onto kidneys that it can damage the kidneys further if we're not careful.
If they're not in renal failure, they will be by the time we're done with them.
It's definitely not something that we want to cause out there.
No, absolutely not.
So we can also kind of look at, as far as the metabolic processing, we have different ways to give medications, and those different ways are going to determine how much of it gets processed or if it gets processed, right? And we talk about something called first pass effect.
Correct. First pass metabolism, right? So when we were saying the absorption, right, there's two routes, parenteral and enteral routes. Enteral is going to be utilizing our GI system. Most commonly, when it comes to pre-hospital medications, that's going to be via PO. You give somebody aspirin, right? Hey, chew this aspirin for me. That's an enteral route via the PO, right? You're using the GI tract for that medication to be uptaked and absorbed into the body. Anything that gets absorbed through the body, through the GI system, has this first pass metabolism. What that means is things that come out of the GI tract go into the portal vein, which is tied to the liver, and it goes to the liver first, where it immediately gets metabolized by the liver. And this can have a pretty profound effect on the total amount of medication that then is available after that metabolization takes effect. Okay, so if you give, 325 milligrams of aspirin chewed, okay, only about 80% of it-ish is available for the body in that bioavailability, because it goes through that portal vein to the liver to be metabolized first, and then it goes to the rest of the body. Conversely, if we give medications via the parenteral route, through an IV, an intravenous line, it bypasses that first pass metabolism, and 100% of that medication is immediately available throughout the body.
Yeah, so bioavailability, it's the percentage of the active drug that successfully reaches the systemic circulation, right? So it can exert its effects at that point. And so the liver, as you mentioned, it acts as a heavy filter. It's going to metabolize, it's going to destroy significant portions of a drug before it can actually get to the rest of the body, which one of the big ones that we know is liver toxic, Tylenol.
Yeah.
He takes excessive amounts of Tylenol. We know that the outcome of that is going to be liver damage.
Profound
liver damage if it does not get treated very, very quickly. And that is because as the liver goes through, the liver is trying to detoxify it. It's trying to break it down. It's trying to get rid of it, and trying to essentially destroy and modify that substance before it gets into the bloodstream itself.
Yeah. And that's why when it comes to our dosing and our routes of administration, et cetera, if we give nitroglycerin, for example, our typical EMS dose for nitroglycerin is 0.4 milligrams sublingual, right?
Yeah.
So if you take that, and nitroglycerin is also a medication that can be given intravenously through an IV drip or an IV bolus in some instances, and we start putting that at micrograms per minute. And you can titrate that up to a very large amount based on the patient's response, right? But we typically start at about 25 to 50 micrograms a minute for our nitroglycerin doses, at least where I've worked in the past, which can be a little bit more or a little bit less than our PO dose. But the effect is immediately felt by the patient. Whereas, our nitroglycerin sublingually has to be absorbed, and then it has some first pass done, and then we see the effects. Whereas anything administered IV is, boom, immediately available in the body.
Right. And let's look at some different contrasts, like morphine. An IV dose for morphine is typically somewhere around, 2 to 10 milligrams is something that we're going to give roughly for a medication for pain. PO dose for that, though, if they're taking that at home, it's going to be a pill that's going to have substantially more milligrams, like 30 milligrams.
Yeah.
And reason for that is because they know that the liver is going to detoxify some of that before it hits the system. And then the bioavailability of that, then they
significantly reduced.
Yes. And so what we're giving them IV can have profound effects on the body because we are not going to go through that process before it hits their system.
Exactly.
And it hits those receptors.
Yeah, these drugs get absorbed into portal circulation. They get routed directly to the liver. The liver acts as that filter, metabolizing and destroying parts of the drug before it can reach our target tissues where we need it to have that effect. So if we can give a medication IV, its onset is much quicker and its effects are much more profound because, again, 100% of that drug is, boom, immediately available.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we talked about our dosing here. We talked about the enteral versus parenteral route and our pharmacokinetics, right? Now let's go back to our pharmacodynamics and really dig in there, right? So we talked kind of about our receptor sites, right? So with pharmacodynamics, the medications itself is going to interact on the cellular level with whatever part of the body is the target, right? So we say target tissues. A lot of times our target tissues are either going to be cardiac in nature, vascular in nature, or neurologic in nature, right? When it comes to EMS. So once the body gets the drug into the system and it delivers that drug to our target tissues, the drug interacts with the body on the cellular level. And pharmacodynamics is the study of that. It's the study of that biochemical and physiological interaction between the drug and the receptor sites. Because drugs don't do anything new to the body. They don't invent new cellular functions. Everything in the body is already in the body. They either enhance a mechanism that's already in the body, they diminish that mechanism, or they completely block that mechanism from being able to be transmitted or released through our biologic signals, through neurotransmitters, etc. So that is really the true down nitty-gritty of what pharmacodynamics is.
And that's something that was always pushed when I went through pharmacodynamics back in paramedic school, way back in the day, with my stone and chisel.
Don't date yourself.
And I went through it. But it's also something that I know we teach is that it's not bringing any effects into the body that the body isn't prepared to receive.
Yeah.
It's just activating those based on the receptor sites that it hits, or our antagonist hits, or our agonist, or whichever medication that we are using in there.
Yeah.
And that's just really important to understand that we're not altering anything. We're just activating the systems.
Yeah. Different parts of the body being activated at different times. And depending on the medication, the pharmacodynamics can be different based on the medication or the dose of the medication we're giving, right? So we can have, a full agonist effect where the medication binds to a receptor site and just fully opens up this response. Or we can have a partial agonist depending on the medication or the dose, where it activates part of it, but it's a diminished response or a partial response, if you will. And it's dose dependent. So a medication such as ketamine, for example, is dose dependent on its pharmacodynamics that we want it to have. So if we want the patient to be fully disassociated for, say, a drug-assisted intubation, we're going to give them a larger dose. Typically, it's a 1 to 2 milligram per kilogram dose, right? Or if we want them just partially sedated, not necessarily fully disassociated for conscious sedation, our dose is significantly less. Or if we're giving it for its synergistic effects with some pain management, we're going to give even less of a dose. And that's, it's either a full agonist or it's a partial agonist based on its dose. And then certain medications are, like we said, antagonists. So agonists make a response that we're trying to get, right? They cause a response. Antagonists completely block a receptor from being able to be utilized. And like we said earlier, that's going to be like our naloxone. It's a complete opiate antagonist, right? It sits there and prevents that opiate from binding to that receptor site and causing that physiologic response.
Yeah, and there's different types of antagonism too, and we could sit here and probably make a whole entire episode on some of them. But some of the big ones, like a
Foreshadowing.
So a competitive antagonism, that is one, and it's obviously by the name, it's going to compete.
Yeah.
Antagonist competes for the agonist, or competes with the agonist, for the same receptor site. And that's what we're talking about. Narcan is a big competitive antagonist.
Yeah, it's going to fight that opiate to kick that opiate off of that mu receptor in order to sit there. It's like a game of violent musical chairs, right?
I saw one the other day, man. It was pretty wild, actually.
It's like our students like fighting for, the seat in the back of the class so they can take a nap, They're going to fight each other for that chair. That's that competitive antagonist.
Yeah, and it can be overcome by increasing the concentration of the agonist itself. So if they were to take more drugs once they were given Narcan, their more opioids on top of that, it's competing with the Narcan itself for that site.
Yeah. And that's, when it comes to pharmacodynamics and pharmacokinetics, this is why it's super important to understand these. Because when it comes to like metabolization and excretion, or that biotransformation and excretion from the body, part of the excretion process is the half-life of a medication, right?
Yeah.
All half-life means is it's the amount of time it takes for the body to clear half of the medication that we administered out of the body. And, why is that important? Like, who cares? Well, with the medication we're discussing right now, like naloxone, its half-life is actually relatively short. Whereas if our patient took a bunch of narcotics and let's say they didn't take it via, an IV, they didn't shoot it up intravenously. They had this opiate ingested via the PO route. Now that opiate is still being absorbed by the body through the GI tract. We give them the Narcan and they wake up and we're all like, okay, you're awake. Hey, do you want to go to the hospital even? Like, you're awake now? Okay, well, sign here. Right. And you AMA that patient without fully understanding the pharmacokinetics and the pharmacodynamics of the Narcan you just gave. Narcan's not going to last very long.
Yeah.
In about 30 minutes, that Narcan, the body's going to clear half of it. It has a short half-life. And now that opiate can take effect again, and you have the patient overdosing again in about 30 minutes.
Yeah.
So it is of paramount importance that we actually understand the pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics behind the medications that we administer, because each situation is different. If maybe we're not talking about naloxone, we could be talking about something else, like calcium channel blockers. How are we going to treat a calcium channel blocker overdose? By understanding the agonist-antagonist portion of pharmacodynamics,
Mm-hmm.
So we have a calcium channel blocker. There's something blocking this receptor site for calcium. How are we going to fight that? We're just going to overwhelm that blockade with more calcium.
Yeah, it's
and
competitive.
Try to knock those off. It's competitive. We're going to try to knock off all the blocker medication with more calcium. And that's just, the pharmacodynamics behind it.
And when we look at that, so that's the competitive side. We also have a non-competitive side, which would also be called irreversible antagonism.
Yeah.
And that irreversible antagonism, that's where essentially your antagonist or your fighter is going to bind to a different site. An allosteric site is, I believe, how you say it. I'm always bad with big names like that. But it binds covalently to the receptor and it prevents the agonist from producing a maximum response regardless of how much concentration. So when we get into like ketamine, it's a non-competitive agonist to that NMDA receptor. And the way that works is it's going to bind to that receptor and it doesn't matter. You're not going to kick that off. It's going to hold that.
It's super glued there now.
Yeah. Super glued until it runs out, right? Completely runs through.
Until that half-life and that medication gets cleared, it's going to hold at that receptor site.
And what's actually kind of interesting is you mentioned half-life.
Yeah.
It takes 4 to 5 half-lives before a medication is essentially not functioning in the body anymore, which is wild because you have essentially your first half-life, you're at 50%. Your second half-life, you're at 25%. It just keeps cutting in half. It's half. That's why it's a half-life. But a lot of people would say, oh, well, 2 half-lives, 50%, 50%. It's not how it works. It's 50% of that 50%,
yes,
which is now 25%. And it continues. And so you have 4 to 5 half-lives out there. Once again, knowing the medication and how long it's going to be in the body, how long it takes to fully metabolize it. This also goes with RSI meds.
Mm-hmm.
And how long until my succinylcholine, or I should say DSI meds, I apologize.
Yeah,
how long, same, but way different. How long until my Sux wears off? How long until my Rock wears off or my Vec wears off or whichever medications that we're getting.
Or your etomidate.
Where we need to resedate
Yeah, we need to be working faster. But that's very true. That it goes big into the pharmacodynamics and understanding how these medications are metabolized by the body, what their effects they're having, our pharmacodynamics, but then the pharmacokinetics too, that these medications, like specifically etomidate, is burned through very quickly and excreted very quickly from the body. So, if you're giving rocuronium and etomidate for an intubation, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, that's weird. I don't understand why tears are falling out of my patient's face and now they're hypertensive and tachycardic because, they're still not moving. Well, that's because the patient's still paralyzed with your rocuronium, but they're no longer sedated because that etomidate wears off very quickly, in about 15 minutes or faster in some states, less than 5 minutes, in some experiences I've had. These patients have burned through that etomidate, and that's that pharmacokinetic side behind it.
I could keep going on about antagonism and competitive, non-competitive, and I mean there are so many others.
These guys never stop talking.
But there's some out there. We will revisit some of those because we will come back to some of these. But let's talk about some other effects that we can get on the body, such as a synergistic effect.
Ooh, synergism.
This is when math does not math.
Math no longer maths. We have broken math, right? It's like out of The Incredibles. Math is math. They can't change math. Well, in this case, we can actually change the math, right? So synergism, or a synergistic effect, happens with a lot of the medications that are out there on the market right now. And that is when two different medications, essentially are acting on the same system, and it makes their effects bigger. Right? It compounds their effect together. So, it's no longer 1 + 1 = 2. It is now 1 + 1 = 4, right? Because these two medications are working on the same system and they are synergizing their effect to make it more profound throughout the body. So the biggest example that I can think of for this is in our intubated patients, right? We give two medications to keep patients, unconscious and comfortable while they're intubated, because that is a very uncomfortable thing that we have to do to people. And that is going to be our opiates and our sedatives, our benzodiazepines. So we give analgesics for pain, and then we give benzodiazepines for sedation. And those two medications work essentially on the same system, and their effects can be synergized to where, 50 micrograms of fentanyl might not really touch a patient that's suffering from, severe irretractable pain, but you mix that with some benzos and now all of a sudden they're unconscious. It's the same dose of medication, but you've just added something that's acting on the same, not even the same receptor sites, but it's acting on the same system, and it's depressed everything. So now that fentanyl is more powerful than it was by itself, if that makes sense, unless I just confused crud out of everyone listening.
Well, I know one of the questions we get a lot is synergism versus potentiation.
Yeah.
And it's one of those that you want to answer same but different, but then they look at you and they're like, well, if it's the same, how's it different? So as Josh mentioned, synergism, it's two active agents enhancing each other's effects. Potentiation is more of a form of synergism itself. The only difference in it's where one agent, which is inactive on its own, is going to increase the effect of another active agent. And so when you hear potentiation, it is a form of synergism where it is essentially activating something and creating an increased response in that. So when we talk about synergism, if you do hear or synergistic effects and you do hear potentiation, that's exactly, they're part of the same family. They are the same, but they are slightly different in the way that one has two active agents, the other one has one inactive agent that essentially multiplies the other agent.
Correct. Now, that brings us, synergism and potentiation, same, different. That brings us to the competition for an active site, right? So we have a receptor site that's open, and we kind of already talked about it, but an antagonistic effect. When we antagonize something, this isn't us making a receptor site angry. We're not it's not that form of antagonism, but what we're doing is it's blocking a physiologic effect is really what I want to kind of drive home when it comes to an antagonist versus an agonist. Antagonism is blocking a physiologic response. with a medication, right? Again, the one we most readily use is going to be that naloxone, but antagonism blocks that physiologic effect of whatever it is we're trying to block.
Yeah, and it's an antagonist. When you antagonize somebody, you're essentially going after them, and like you said, it's not attacking the actual site.
Yeah, it's not making the receptor site angry,
but it's antagonizing the other medication and the fact that it's going to compete for it.
Correct.
And nobody likes that. And he's like, hey, I made it here first. I'm going to block that.
Exactly. That's mine now. I'm going to sit in this chair.
So I'm going to sit here.
I got the comfy chair.
You can push me out later.
Yeah.
Well, I know this kind of got mentioned earlier, I believe, when we were talking, and part of the kinetics and the dynamics that we talk about is a therapeutic window, or what I would call a therapeutic index.
Correct.
And when we look at a medication and we're studying medications and giving medications, it's important. Once again, we got to know our doses. We got to know our times. On our doses, we need to know our dose because there's an effective dose and then there's a lethal dose. If you
and we don't want to get to one of those.
There's definitely one line we don't want to cross, and that would be the latter. The effective dose, with medications, you have to get to a certain dose to be able to elicit an effect.
Correct.
And some medications that if you don't actually get to that dose, like there is a minimum dose.
Mm-hmm.
I've always, atropine was one that always stood out because that was the one when we did our drug cards.
Correct.
Like, oh, wow, you actually have to give a minimum on this. But you have an effective dose, which is where that medication is going to take effect, and you start getting a therapeutic effect from it, which means it elicits a response from the site, the receptor sites. Now you go over which you would consider like the toxic dose or the lethal dose. Then of course at that point we are now causing harm to the patient themselves, and we are going to do damage to these patients.
So therapeutic index, there's medications out there that have an extremely wide therapeutic index. They're very safe medications, so to speak, right? Narcan, for example. I love how we keep coming back to Narcan.
Yeah. It's just so easy to talk about.
I had a patient who was administered 32 milligrams of naloxone within a 25-minute period of time.
Speechless.
Because he was having a stroke. And I love my law enforcement partners, but that was all they could give, and man, did they give it. So this patient received 32 milligrams of Narcan. Did he have any negative effect from it? Not from the naloxone, not from the medication itself, maybe from the volume that was administered intranasally. But
I'm pretty sure that stopped working after one cc per nostril.
Narcan itself has a very wide therapeutic window. At our minimum dose is typically around 0.4, right? 0.4 of Narcan to start bringing our patient out of respiratory depression, and a max dose of a lot. You can give a lot of Narcan before it becomes anywhere near a lethal dose, and it's going to probably be from volume overload before it's from the actual medication itself. But don't quote me on that. But so like fentanyl, for example, if you fall and you've broken your arm and I show up and I'm like, I'm going to give you 0.1 milligrams of fentanyl for pain management, nothing is going to happen except you're going to hate me more because you're still in pain because I haven't reached the effective dose yet. Now, conversely, if I show up and I'm like, oh, I'm going to give you fentanyl, and how much? All of it. And I give you 1 gram of fentanyl, well, that's going to push straight over to the lethal dose. And, good news, you're no longer in pain. Bad news, now I'm in prison for killing you. But that takes us way outside of our margin of safety or our therapeutic window, right? And this truly becomes important because understanding the two concepts we've been talking about, like pharmacokinetics, that determines if and when the drug reaches to this window. Pharmacodynamics determines what happens to the body once that drug is inside. So, the wider this therapeutic index, the safer the drug is.
When we talk about you're talking about width, we can talk about the narrow side. So what's something that we would run into a lot out in the field that have narrow therapeutic indexes? One of them's lithium that we can see out there.
Yeah.
A warfarin can, which is why they have to do blood tests constantly.
Yep.
The other one that they do a ton of blood tests on is when they get put on digitoxin.
God, that's such an old medication.
Yeah. And I'll tell you the side effects of it. And when you get to that lethal dose or that toxic dose, it is downhill really, really fast with them. They start having really, really bad side effects from that medication.
All of the side effects is what they have.
And it's dysrhythmias. They've got halos around lights. I mean, it leads up to seizure, coma, death, essentially. And it has a really, really narrow therapeutic index. So the doctors have to be extremely cautious trying to get them between the effective dose and that lethal dose. And that's kind of the same also with that lithium being another one, or theophylline is another one that you would see out there in the field at times.
Yeah, and each medication's profile is different. Some medications have a wider index, some medications have a narrow index, some medications, it depends on what other medications the patient's on, and that dictates that particular medication's effective dose and toxic dose. It's constantly changing. That's why understanding these core concepts is super important, because, pharmacology tells us there is no perfect drug. Every medication that we have out there on the ambulance carries the potential for toxicity if we give it at the wrong time or at the wrong dose, right? And everything that we're doing, it's a balance between absorption, metabolism, the interaction that it has within the body at the time, and then how it's excreted out of the body. It's a balancing act is what we're doing.
So as we're kind of looking at this balancing act, and we kind of look back as we kind of close this out, pharmacokinetics. Wow. I just made a new word. Pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics, we should be looking at those. And if you look at essentially the rights of medication administration, we should be going through our rights as we get ready to administer this. So we understand the right dose, the right route. This is the right patient for that medication. This is the right time. Of course, we got to document everything we did. And you kind of go through those rights as you're doing that.
And there's 8 of them.
And there's 8 now. There used to be 6.
There used to be 5.
Now we're
at 8.
And we need to be able to understand the side effects and understand the issues that might come with this medication so that we know when we give them what we should be looking for. We can also coach the patient on, hey, this might make you a little nauseous. Let me know if it does.
Yeah.
Hey, this is going to take your breath away because I'm literally going to give you adenosine, which is going to stop your heart. You start it, allow it to restart itself.
This might feel funny for a minute.
So our biggest thing is knowing our pharmacokinetics and our dynamics so that we can be safe when we treat our patients and stay within our therapeutic indexes and our
Absolutely. It's all a balancing act, and above all, we don't want to harm the patient.
Well, I think that closes it out for this. As we said, this is going to kind of kick off a little bit of a mini series on pharmacology, and we're kind of excited to jump into this subject and kind of get through some of these. We thank you guys for joining us, and we will hope to see you guys on the next one.
See you.